more than half of our audience probably hasn't seen the Four Corners piece at all. So if you want to give kind of a background on that, Ian, that would be probably a little bit beneficial, just in terms of setting up what and over the top the hit piece really it is, and maybe who Sally Neighbor is and some of the other people involved in it.
Sure. Okay, so the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC, it's kind of like the Australian equivalent of the BBC or perhaps NPR, that purports to do proper investigative journalism. And Four Corners would be their flagship program. You know, like it's been running for nearly 50 years, and it is often really quite well researched. Unfortunately, what they touted as a forensic investigation really wasn't an investigation at all, let alone forensic. You know, that it was really quite appalling. They just dug up people with a grudge, like Russ Bridger from The Guardian, or Dom Scheitberg, who was a ex-employee of WikiLeaks, who was actually asked to leave. You know, so it was quite disappointing that they did that. But back to the question of hero or villain, what you've got to realize in a sense is that Julian's work has threatened a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and that's the war machine. So they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to smear Julian and to shift the narrative from his work to be about him. And in actual fact, they've now moved into the spending of billions of dollars with the recent IMF loans to Ecuador. The US government really bankrolled that or pushed for that, which was 4.3 upon his arrest and another 6 billion the following week. So when you are threatening a multi-trillion-dollar industry like the global war machine, it's no wonder that billions of dollars are being spent to smear you. And so when you've got the mainstream media shifting the narrative to hero or villain, it totally destroys the ability to actually look at the work that's going on.
Yeah, and they even call this a forensic journalism piece. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, that's just too much. It is. It's too much. I can't hear that and not laugh.
Yeah, that's what they
journalism.
are calling it.
Well, they did dig up a few people from his past, you know,
like
Russ Bridger and Dom Scheitberg. But that was as far as their forensics went, really. What was really disappointing was that no reference was made to Nils Meltzer's recent report. Now, of course, Nils Meltzer is the UN's special rapporteur on torture. They made no mention of the UN Human Rights Report from 2016 that talked about the cruel and unusual punishment that Julian is being subjected to. So it's really part of the narrative to again steer away from the issues at hand and what is actually going on, and make it all about this good or evil type rubbish.
Well, I think that's the entire reason it is a narrative, because you can't really argue with an outlet that has a 100% accuracy rate. You can't argue the information that's being released, because the information that's being released is an information leak. It's, you know, it's not up for debate again next to 100% accuracy rate whether or not it's legitimate information. So they have to assassinate the character of the individual. This bore out with the Mark Davies footage that we all watched last week or the week before. If there's no villain and no hero, then it's just the naked information, and the naked information says there's a lot of war crimes being committed by a lot of really bad people who have damn near unchecked power, and, as you mentioned, had a very strong financial interest to keep it going.
That's exactly the case. I wouldn't be surprised if there's quite a bit of professional jealousy going on here. As great as Four Corners is, they certainly don't have a record anywhere near as good as WikiLeaks, 100% accuracy, though their record would be a lot better than, say, much of the Murdoch press. But you had this whole argument here in Australia coming from a rather low-grade journalist called Peter Grest. Now, Peter Grest was working for Al Jazeera when the Egyptian government bundled him up with a couple of others and put them in jail. Now, at that time, the Australian government went to great lengths to get him out of jail. He was in there for about 400 days or something. But not only did they provide consular assistance, they provided diplomatic assistance, and they had our foreign minister go to Egypt and interview their counterpart there and secured him a release. Now, they did a similar thing for James Ricketson in Thailand. But of course, they're quite happy to be able to go to countries that are brown people, for what's a better term. Whereas the Australian government, because you've got to realise the Australian government's got a really bad history and a long history of extreme racism. And there's no way that our government's got the guts to talk to our former colonial masters or our current colonial master, which is basically the UK and the US. They're white people countries, or, they're dominated by white people, and they are our colonial masters. So what our government's offered, Julian, has been the bare minimum of consular assistance. And this stands in stark contrast to what they've offered other journalists like Grest and James Ricketson. And it really comes down to the fact that Julian's work is threatening the military, the armaments industry, whereas the other two's works wasn't affecting that in such a direct way. That's my analogy on it anyway.
What kind of effect does a hit piece like this have on just random Australian citizen? What's the extent of influence that sort of bullshit propaganda has?
A negative influence. For a lot of times, the two big things that we get when we're just out doing general public engagement, we get people saying, "Oh, Trump got elected because of his activities," or he's a sex offender. Now, the first one that I usually say in counter to the Trump election is, well, actually it's, and please don't take offense, but actually it's the American electoral system that's at fault here, that's flawed here, because Hillary Clinton actually won that vote by the popular vote by about 3 million votes. And the Americans, or the US, are going to great lengths to find a guilty party here rather than look at the flaws of their own system. And that is the crux of the matter. Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. If your system wasn't so bizarre, I mean, I know all of our Western modern democracies are all a sham and they are all false, but the American one, the US one, has got to be the worst. I won't say any more on that for now. But the other thing is, of course, what a lot of people don't realize is that SW, one of the survivors or victims of Julian's supposed behavior, refused to sign any documents from the word go. She stated very clearly she was not raped. She has said that right throughout the last 9 years. Now, the thing is, in Sweden, what can happen is you can have a police officer or a prosecutor decide if you've been raped, whether you like it or not. So the state effectively decided she'd been raped. And when the state does that, they appoint you legal representation, whether you want it or not. But more alarmingly, and in a real world, it's probably a good thing, but in a situation like this, it's being abused, they appoint you a media spokesperson. So SW has legal representation and a media spokesperson for her case, yet she's not given consent to any of this. Her consent has been violated for 9 years. Why isn't anybody looking at that perspective? You know, mainly because it's murky and it's awkward. And the other aspect, of course, is when we hear something like a sex allegation, we think of how it's addressed in our own country. We don't have the time or the ability to do the research and find out how it's done in another country like it is in Sweden. It's quite different than here or where you are.